Until now, coffee industry has been very, very market driven. So the market decides to buy from one farmer versus the other based on solely quality, for instance, or things that they think will sell for a better price rather than thinking about like the whole sustainable development of a community.
When we went to Costa Rica, our goal was that we were going to help them build micro businesses that are typical. But what happened is when we actually got there, we noticed that almost everyone was producing coffee. It was kind of part of their livelihood. But they never looked at coffee as a business opportunity. It's a cash crop that you pick up once every year during the harvest and you sell it to whoever's paying you the best price, which is usually at a loss. It's just something in your backyard.
One realization while we were in Costa Rica was just the income disparity that existed in the coffee supply chain, right? So they were barely making $3 per kilogram of coffee, whereas we were, as consumers, paying $60 easily for a fair trade coffee. Income disparity is one of the biggest things that we saw, but another thing was a gender issue that was really prevalent in the coffee farming communities. And I think a lot of the farming communities in general face this gender gap. They face a lot harsher environment to compete or negotiate for their coffee to be sold in a global market, or even locally, they were facing a lot more difficulties. Another thing that we saw was the excess of education or training or any sort of information that these smallholder women producers have in comparison to their male counterparts was very, very limited. So there were like a few intersectional things that we were like, okay, this should be the group that we work with.
Now Bean Voyage, it's a nonprofit social enterprise that has two key elements. So first we do a training program where farmers learn how to take a coffee fruit and turn it into a final bag of coffee. And so everything involved in that process, from depulping the coffee, washing it, drying it, roasting it, packaging it, and even branding, we basically provide them with that training so that they learn how to do everything themselves. The second side is kind of going back to the core of where we started, is market access. So we still connect our farmers to buyers of coffee. So coffee shops, offices that consume coffee, and individual consumers who want to buy coffee. And what that does is ensures a 300% increase in their income from what they earn from intermediaries. So kind of drastically increases their income and then allows them to lead their communities towards a sustainable future.
We are trying to do things differently. We are trying to say these are the needs of the community and this is like what they need in order to sustain their life based on coffee. Otherwise, in 50 years, we're not gonna have any coffee farm that wants to farm anything but cash, like immediate cash crop. That pays a lot better than coffee, because coffee has been proven multiple times that it's more of like a loss-making than a profit-making business. So what can we do kind of like to address that? And we need the market's help.
Hello, I am Sasha Nicole, and this is SungHee and Abhi Kanal, the co-founders and executive directors of Bean Voyage. Today, SungHee and Abhi will share with us about the work that Bean Voyage is doing in Costa Rica to help smallholder women utilize their agency in agricultural communities and eradicate the gender gap that is limiting their agency. So thank you for joining us, SungHee and Abhi. Before we dig in, could you just tell us a little bit about your background and how the two of you decided to create Bean Voyage?
For sure. Thank you so much for having us for this conversation. We're really honored to be here. I'll give a short background of how we got started with Bean Voyage, and maybe SungHee will tell a bit more about your background as well personally. So my name is Abhinav Kanal. I go by Abhi as well. One of the co-founders of Bean Voyage, and I'm originally from Nepal. And SungHee and I, we both went to a university in a small town in Indiana called Earlham College. And as part of our 4-year academic experience, it was a Quaker university. And so as part of our kind of academic experience, we had a lot of opportunities to learn a bit more about social justice and social entrepreneurship. and look at it from a more practical perspective rather than just kind of theoretical. And so we got a lot of opportunities to work on projects together, got a lot of opportunities to travel as well. And one such project that we both were involved in was actually happening in Costa Rica. This was in 2014, and one of our very close and dear friends was leading a project in her community center, invited the two of us to join the project to work with a women's group that was working on forming an association that was looking to kind of generate more sustainable sources of revenue for the community. As part of that project and as part of our travels there together at a very kind of young stage with very limited Spanish vocabulary, we got to exchange stories and meals with some of the people in the association. And we learned a little bit more about rural development, not just from kind of one perspective as outsiders as we are, but from the perspectives of the producers themselves. And we learned that a lot of them were producing coffee. Many of them were not really sustainably living as a result of their production of coffee. In fact, a lot of them were in the verge of either selling or moving away from coffee farms. So that got us a bit of a wake-up call, and we realized that we had to do a bit more than just a short-term project. So the two of us decided to dig deeper, learn a bit more about the sector, spent the rest, I think almost 1.5 years, learning about the coffee sector, learning about what is it that we could kind of fill the gaps in. And that's where we kind of started thinking of Bean Voyage as an interesting prospect. So we had a really catchy name, which is Bean Voyage. And we started a very simple website, beanvoyage.com back then. And our initial idea was to basically create a marketplace where some of the people that we had met and had known in the last couple of years during those visits could get a direct market in the US. And so it's a very, very simple e-commerce platform. That was the very early stages. Very soon we realized it wasn't just enough to have a market access, that we needed to make sure that we had to go beyond. And so the beyond part was where we learned that the gaps were not just around market, but it was actually a systemic problem around gender and how smallholder women were less likely to have access to markets, also less likely to have access to training. And so we started expanding and growing and registered as an organization. And ever since, as they say, rest has been history for us. So it's kind of a background from our side.
Yeah. SungHee, any thoughts to share on that too, or is that pretty?
No, I think that was he did an amazing job. Yeah.
That's a phenomenal story. And you touched on this a little bit, but why is the focus on women so crucial?
Right. And I think that almost like naturally happened for us to be exposed to the women and women's association in the southern part of Costa Rica when we were starting. But I think also like the literature has really informed us the importance of working with women in general, especially in agriculture, and what that means in the global context, right? So some of the data that we were able to kind of like learn in the very beginning of our organization were done by IFAD and FAO, and they estimate there are around 500 million smallholder farmers around the world who are responsible for about 80% of the food production globally. And that's like obviously beyond coffee. And in coffee alone, we estimate that there are about 12.5 million smallholder farms with over 60 million individuals working on this farm. So, it's just like a really large number of farming communities that we're talking about that are responsible for, the food production for us globally. And women's involvement varies by region, but oftentimes it's accounted for about 50% of these farms. So they are, a large part of the farming economy and like the ecosystem, but oftentimes they're not necessarily visible, not only in coffee, but in general because of the structural barriers and social stigmas that exist that make it impossible for them to kind of like raise their voice and share their thoughts in this decision-making places, and also just kind of like sell their product at a better price. Some studies have shown us that women in general are earning, about 39% less than their male counterparts in the market. And that's often related to kind of the challenges and the hardships that we were mentioning earlier about, access to technical training, assistance, finance, in addition to the market. And I think in general, like agriculture is not really an easy field for any farmer, whether you're a coffee farmer or you're a rice farmer, for instance. The case for my grandmother, for instance, it's a really hard field because prices and climate change, as well as the market condition, necessarily they haven't necessarily favored smallholder farmers in the most recent history. And women find themselves in much more difficult position because of the social stigmas and the challenges that's added on top of it. And going beyond maybe the obvious reason why we need to work with women in agriculture, because that's just the right thing to do to create an equitable and equal work environment for everyone. There's also an economic case that we are reading a little bit more about in the recent, the history of the development economies by the development economists and other fields, where closing the gender gap is estimated to increase the farm's yield by 20 to 30% in general, and reduce the global hunger by 12 to 17%. So there are quite a lot of studies that point to the potential that women's involvement and increased women's involvement will have, not only in the context of the coffee industry, but in the context of the global agricultural system, and also the well-being of everyone around globally. So I think there were multiple personal connections to it, but also I think in general it just makes sense for us to work with women in farms.
And there's definitely a lot of research too that suggests that when you invest in a woman, you're not just investing in her, but you're investing in everyone she encounters, because women just by nature will turn around and invest it into their children and in their communities. So it's, I like to think of it as an investment that really pays dividends, because there's really a ripple effect that comes with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me about Bean Voyage offers 4 main approaches. Can you say more about the approaches and how they impact your mission?
For sure. Yeah, so our main approach, our model is called the care trade model. And the concept around care trade started when we started actually piloting some of our projects with smallholder women. And we started learning that a lot of the language around trade is this idea of an exchange of goods between people, right? So we talk a lot about fair trade, right? We realize that trade is actually not just an exchange of goods, but it's an opportunity to care about the people and the planet that produce most of our favorite products, starting with coffee. So that's how the philosophy around care trade started for us at Bean Voyage. And we wanted to make sure that the people that care for most of the people, smallholder women, are being cared for and are being supported in their journey and their vision. So that's how we started with the concept of care trade. And it basically has 4 kind of pillars, 4 pillars that form a package of services that we provide to smallholder women. The first one is called Care Training. This is our training program. It's our kind of standard program that we run every single year. It's a 12-week training where producers learn about a new topic or a couple of different topics every single year to provide support towards increasing yield and quality of their coffee. We are looking at going beyond coffee, but at this time, most of our training curriculum is focused heavily towards kind of improving coffee production. So whether it's production, processing, quality control, finance at the farm level and household level, all the way to kind of marketing, export regulations, all of that, we cover it during that training program. So that's our kind of signature program. The second program is called the Care Market, which goes kind of hand in hand with the first one. At the end of each training cycle and at the end of their harvest, smallholder women that have graduated from our program are then part of this network of market buyers around the world. Right now, we work mostly in the US, Canada, and Europe. And starting this year, also expanding to South Korea, where we have a network of buyers that commit to purchasing directly from one of our partner producers. And so it's whether they're a small scale roaster, whether they're an importer that is looking to buy more directly from the producers. So we establish those market linkages, and the kind of big crux of this for us is that we ensure that the prices are at least 200 to 300% higher than what the commodity market is able to guarantee for the producers. So that's where we come in terms of negotiation, providing any kind of additional support for our producer partners so that they can guarantee that higher price. The last 2 programs, sorry, go for it.
I just wanted to clarify. So if I'm understanding right, you're essentially negotiating on their behalf so that the farmers can focus on production and doing what they need to do, and they're going to be compensated equitably. Is that the intention? Is that the process? Am I understanding that right? Okay.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And I think, and around the language, right, it's important for us to clarify, we don't necessarily negotiate on their behalf. They're very much part of the negotiating table. Yeah. Obviously, around the challenges with language and access to digital devices make it difficult now, but we make sure they're part of the conversation from day one.
Because I think that maybe I should reframe my question. I was wondering if you are equipping them to negotiate for themselves, or if you are negotiating for them, but it's kind of a bit of both. You're kind of accompanying them in the negotiation process. Is it more that? Okay. Okay. Now I understand. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a balance for sure. And and I think we're over the years starting to learn a bit more about how the industry works as well. Because if you remember, when we started, it was a small e-commerce website. We were using DHL to ship coffee.
Yep.
That was a great way to get started. But I think over the years, we've had to figure out a better way to systematize and especially consolidate. This year, we're, if I'm not wrong, SungHee, correct me, I think we're working with more than 50 smallholder women whose coffees are getting a direct market access. And so as we increase market access, we're starting to realize the importance of consolidating and making sure that the negotiations happen at a clear level for the producers. So that's the second main program. The third main program is called Care Engagement. So this is our government advocacy program where we work closely with the government of Costa Rica and local level organizations and institutions to make sure that there are more representations of smallholder women at a policy level, as well as kind of a local level as well, a local representation level as well. And then the final program is called the Care Support, which only started at the end of, or at the beginning of 2020 after COVID hit, where we learned that almost 25% of the producers in our network and their families were facing food insecurity as a result of COVID, but that the problem was not unique to COVID, and that with climate change and other challenges, a lot of communities are facing challenges around resilience. And so we started a program to provide different kinds of well-being and kind of healthcare support to smallholder women. We started with a very simple idea of food baskets where producers would receive scholarships, so-called scholarships to be able to have food baskets during the kind of toughest times of COVID-19 in the first wave. We're relaunching that program this year again to make sure that we can consistently provide support for our smallholder producers. So those are the kind of 4 approaches of Bean Voyage.
I want to dig in a little bit more to your care program. Can you say more about how that works and how the community, kind of comes together in that? I thought that was really interesting when you were explaining that to me in our previous call.
For sure, yeah. And I guess we'll switch if you want to take that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can definitely do that. So what we did in the very beginning of like the onset of COVID-19 in Costa Rica was that we did a quick survey with everyone in our network to see how they were doing in terms of being able to feed their family and obviously feed themselves, but also accessing like necessary support in their communities. And we quickly found out that there were 2 big challenges, and they were quite defined geographically. So one part of Costa Rica in Tarasu, which is really famous for its coffee production, their biggest challenge wasn't necessarily the food insecurity, because they had access to their own farm to kind of grow certain food, but their biggest challenge was that more than 70% of their contracts were being canceled, and there was no cash flow coming in. And another part of Costa Rica, in the southern part of Costa Rica, near Biolay and the Panamanian border, their biggest challenge last year in the very beginning was they just had no cash flow, but their bigger challenge was not being able to even have food, because a lot of them were relying on coffee tourism for their revenue sources, and there was just not a lot of support system existing for them to be able to buy food and feed their family. So there were 2 big challenges, and we were trying to see is there a way for us to connect these 2 problems so that we can run one campaign to be able to provide support to 2 distinct groups. So what we did was, over a quick few weeks, we planned a fundraiser to buy up these coffees, roast them, and actually sell them to companies and other places where they, some of the companies are also going through with the challenges around employee motivation and their own internal challenges. So we were why not give your employees a bag of coffee, roasted coffee, deliciously roasted by community members in Tarasu in Costa Rica, and then we are going to use the revenue margin from that sales to be able to buy food baskets to provide food for 26 families to begin with, and we kept adding on. So we ran this program for about 3 months, so that we were able to support, I believe it was around 1,800 people in total, but that was like a roughly estimating everyone that's indirectly impacted as well. But I think directly there was over 100 individuals involved in these campaigns and being impacted by the campaign that we ran for 2 months, providing I think the provision went on for like about 4 months, but the core campaign went on only for about a few weeks. I think it was about like two months at the end, that were able to kind of like be part of this program directly.
Yeah. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And how does your team determine which farmers to or partners to invest in?
I can also answer that. So we have a selection process that we open up every year. So this year it's determined obviously by different factors, whether it's like in the climate element and or like also the funding cycle sometimes. But it usually opens in June. And so we open up the application for everyone in the country that identify themselves as women to apply. And the amount of people that we are able to work with every year gets also determined by various factors. But we give priorities for the selection process to farmers who own less than 3 hectares of coffee farm, who identify themselves as smallholder, but also like, looking at the size of the farm and prioritize those that are actually owning less than 3 hectares. And we also prioritize farmers who've never really attended any training opportunities before, because we want to be kind of a stepping stone for farmers in their communities to be able to go out and beyond to attend any other opportunities. But, that barrier is really hard. So, really high. So we're trying to kind of like minimize that and act as a stepping stone. So we obviously prioritize those who's never been exposed to any training opportunities. But then we also say you don't have to be a legal owner of your farm to be able to apply. So if you identify yourself as a coffee farmer, you have the rights to apply, and we are going to consider your application, because we know that the legal ownership is oftentimes one of the check boxes that a lot of these opportunities have, but that's one of the biggest barriers for any women to participate in these training opportunities, because not only legally, but a lot of the times it's socially not okay or not common for women to own a farm. And even if they get an inheritance when they get married, oftentimes they just like merge it under their husband's name, so they're never really like mapped out in the national registry. So that's one of the biggest clarification that we make and the disclaimer that we make in the applications, like you can apply even if you're not the legal owner. And that has really opened up a lot of women who identify themselves as coffee farmers to be actually part of our network. Mm-hmm.
And do you focus exclusively on partnering with coffee farmers, or do you invest in other initiatives as well?
Should I go for it, SungHee?
Yeah, you can go for it, and I can fill in. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So we're at this point we're heavily invested in coffee. We apply a very interesting obviously you're probably familiar with human-centered design and the process of kind of the steps of piloting ideas and really testing and iterating. And I think that's been a big part of our core from way before when we even started Bean Voyage, where any projects, anything that we got involved in, we wanted to make sure that we're fully engaged and have tested various ideas to a point where it's really sturdy before we start something new. So we're solely focused on coffee for the last 4 years and are going strong with it. As we're starting to see that we're becoming a more holistic program, as we mentioned earlier, our 4 approaches are quite holistic at this point. Now we're starting to feeling good. We're looking at advancing to other communities, and so starting to look at cacao, tea, spices. We're starting to see a lot of similarities in the same gaps that we talk about in those communities. And so we're starting to see that as potential investment opportunities. It's still going to take us a couple of years to actually fully get there, because I think what we have seen as our special sauce is making sure that our program is extremely inclusive for smallholder women, and it provides that safe space, which means it takes a lot of time to build strong relationships with the partners, right? And so we're going to be investing a couple of years in building those new relationships and really investing in that. And once we feel like we're ready for it, we're probably going to be launching a few new programs in a couple of other countries as well that would focus on other products as well.
Excellent. That sounds good too, to start, don't bite off more than you can chew, really focus on what you're doing and do that well. And then once that's solidified, then go ahead and move into new markets. So that's excellent. If anyone wanted to support or get involved in your work, what would be a good way for them to do that?
Should I go for it? Yeah, I think the best way, the easiest way to get in touch is obviously through our website. So beanvoyage.org is a very easy way to get in touch with us. We'll probably also share a link for a couple ways in which folks can kind of join the program. We call it the Care Trade Movement. So there's a couple of really interesting ways in which people can join. As we're starting to look at our big vision for 2030, we're targeting 10 million smallholder farmers. Hopefully we can serve in that time period, and that's going to require a lot more people than our small team to get there. And so we're looking for partners and funders that would be interested in collaborating towards that vision.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure that that link is also in the description, so it's very easily accessible for anyone who wants to follow up with you. They won't have any challenges reaching you. And kind of on that note, so Bean Voyage is both a nonprofit and a social enterprise. Can you say more about the social enterprise model and why it's important in advancing your work and your mission?
For sure. SungHee, would you like to go for this one, or should I kick it off?
The sound got really, really loud. I want to go for this.
I'll go for it, and we'll make sure that. Okay, so I'll just kind of start fresh. Yeah, so Bean Voyage is a nonprofit social enterprise, and so there are kind of two elements to this, right? We have a nonprofit arm that's heavily focused around program delivery. So that's the arm that focuses heavily on making sure that our producers are getting the training program, the different advocacy services, and our general support program. And then we have a social enterprise. It's not a separate registered entity, but it's a social enterprise that focuses on generating revenue to make sure that we're running sustainably, right? So we depend heavily on, at least right now, on subsidies, whether it's government funding, foundation funding, things like that, to sustain our programmatic elements. But then we're slowly starting to create a revenue channel that eventually, hopefully, will surpass the donations and grants that we receive, so that we can be a more sustainable organization. That was very important for us from the very get-go. From the very initial idea of creating a website was that we would make sure that some revenue would be allowing us to actually sustain. Over the years, as we've grown, we've seen that it's a lot harder to balance the two. Obviously, donations and funders don't want to. There's a language around kind of earned revenue that's not always appreciated, and so there's a little bit of hesitation from funder side around it. And then the market as well looks at a nonprofit with this arm of like, oh, nonprofits don't maybe necessarily have the same structure that a private company has. And so we're always balancing our communication and our language. But I think as we're starting to show the effectiveness of our programs and actually creating that balance of making sure we're training producers, but we're also making sure that they're being connected to the market, I think more and more people are starting to believe in the work that we do and actually come in and support as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and when it comes to measuring your impact, you measure two areas that I'm aware of: income and agency. Could you say more about why those metrics are important and how you measure them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are two of the kind of the most important indicators of our impact that we measure in our organization. So a lot of the impacts are measured through pre and post program self-evaluation. So producers, when they join, they're asked to fill out a evaluation form, like a survey, to kind of let us know where they are at that point. It includes not only about their knowledge level, because we also need to understand like what's the knowledge improvement that they get out of this training, but also around demographic element around what are some of the hardships that they have, like are they actually able to earn enough income from their coffee farming alone, or are they relying on any other income sources, right? So these are like key elements that really inform our training, because we are not only focusing on improving their farm, coffee farm business, but our work is really centered around improving, making sure that the producers are able to run their business in a sustainable and profitable manner and actually afford a life that is livable and thriving, right, and prosperous. So that's kind of like the element around, I think, the income, where we it's one of the most important indicators, just because I think it is also an easy number to look at and then see the impact, understand the impact that our training and market connection is able to have. But it also gives us a kind of a sense about, are there actually enabling environments that's actually functioning for them to go out and thrive as a business. So this is kind of like a indicator that let us know that are there any other elements that we need to also be focusing on? Should we actually be strengthening our advocacy program so that they're able to actually move their coffee with ease, even if they don't have the as much mobility element as I think their male counterparts. So it's one of the indicators, but isn't necessarily a singular focus that we have either. And maybe also the income element is important for us to look at beyond the price element, because we know that it's not only the per pound price that they're able to earn, but because even if you get like a really, really high price for a coffee, coffee product, for instance, that you offer to the market, but if your productivity is so low that you're not guaranteed a living income, does that price actually matter? I think that was a push for us to kind of look at income instead of price also. In addition to that, I think the element around agency is also quite important to us as an organization. It's definitely a harder metric to measure. And a lot of the times we look at the self-report evaluation, but we also conduct farm visits and focus group interviews. And that's where we get a bit more sense of what their level of agency might be at home. So the questions, there are questions around, what kind of decision-making power do they perceive they have at the household level, by looking at like the comfort level that they have about raising a concern that they may have with their partner, a comfort level around, how many times actually have they, brought up an issue to their community members when a certain thing didn't work out between them. And this is kind of like directly linked to some of the workshops that we do on gender and community, where we provide producers with a initially like the storytelling workshop to be aware of like their own environment and be comfortable with their own story and themselves, but also kind of giving them with the tools to be able to use methodologies like circles in times like in times of like conflict. How do you actually like address it in a way that doesn't really interfere and interrupt with your ecosystem, but actually foster and strengthen that ecosystem around you, and create, how do you also create like a support group around you, and that's like almost like a natural byproduct of our training program. And that's something that we've also seen be really important, because this is really, I think, directly linked to the resilience, building resilience within the community, or actually just recognizing the resilience that's already there in their communities, but also kind of seeing making sure that the impact that we have maybe with income can be actually sustained, and it's beyond the short term, for instance, workshops that we do, but will the impacts be actually like long lived? And I think that's oftentimes related to the agency element.
Yeah. What do you know off the top of your head what your progress to date is in that?
I think I guess I could share a few elements, and obviously there's more on our annual report that we can that we just recently launched. But I think that the thing that was really exciting for us, a big milestone, was that in 2020 we served more than 200 smallholder women farmers and reached over 808 community members throughout the country in Costa Rica. What started as a two people, like we initially worked with two smallholder women, and so that kind of milestone for us is it's a huge number for sure. And obviously the ripples of that, the fact that this year's impact results came out earlier in February. From our self-reported surveys, the producers have mentioned that each producer is on average impacting 3.5 additional people in their family and the community level. And so obviously it's creating the ripples that we initially had kind of dreamt of way back when we started. Every year we calculate a knowledge retention rate calculation, which is where we take a pre and post survey to just test their knowledge on different elements, different topics. This year's results was that improvement of the score was a bit over 30%. And so producers are seeing pretty significant impact in their ability to actually capture the knowledge, not just kind of providing training and saying we're training producers, but actually making sure that they're retaining the knowledge in the format that we provide our training. And then the final piece around price, as SungHee was talking, we're seeing a 3x increase in price overall. This year's number, I think, is a little bit, I think it's around 212%, which obviously was a relation with COVID and how prices during the harder time last April was pretty low for our producers. And then, a few other things. So we provided a bit over 600 kilograms of food baskets for producers as a result of our food insecurity program. So those are kind of other results, other impact metrics that we never actually aimed to measure when we started the year last year, but happened as a result of COVID. And then the final kind of results that I thought would be interesting to share is around agency. So we calculate an agency score every year, which is, again, the survey that SungHee was mentioning, where producers talk about their decision-making power, ability to kind of come up and have conversations at a family and a business level. We did a couple of different surveys, and the score on an average was about 92.5% of producers felt like they have greater agency at a family and a business level than they did before they started the program. So that's a really kind of inspiring number for us, which obviously I think our threshold was much lower when we were actually starting Bean Voyage. We thought we would have somewhat of a support, but that is reaffirming that our model is really impactful in a way that's more centering the producers and their needs more than our ideas and vision.
Right, and it's beyond a transaction in terms of selling coffee, that it's really holistic, like you said at the beginning, that you're addressing multiple layers of the different barriers that these small farm holders have to overcome. So that sounds very well laid out, very thoughtful. Can you say a little bit more about how you determine the sustainability and the viability of your efforts?
That's a really, really good question. I think earlier touching upon a little bit on, I think a lot of the work that we are doing right now is focused on equipping the smallholder coffee producers to be able to kind of chart their own path towards a sustainable business, right? Our training goes on average for 2 years per farmer, and they remain they stay part of our network. But beyond that 2-year active engagement is actually their job to be able to kind of go out and get things kind of done for their own dreams and for their own business. But then I think, so I think the agency element is really important. But another kind of designing element that we were able to do as part of like the approach that we have is, involving youth in coffee farming communities. And especially I think the population that we call Nini in Costa Rica, where the population that's not having education nor having much employment opportunity. So it's like, ni empleado, ni educado. So like a term that exists because it's such a common phenomenon that we right now see, not only during COVID, that a lot of young generations finding it really hard to find an opportunity to actually build a future for themselves. So we kind of, in 2019, worked with a small group of 13 youth to experiment with like a thought that was also proposed by one of our farmers' daughter, like Jacqueline. She suggested like, we could do like a fellowship, and maybe you guys can provide us with some tools so that we can start our own business. And we're like, okay, that sounds like a really cool project that we could like, do. And we, co-designed it with a few other daughters in the network and launched the CARE Fellowship in 2019. And we saw there's a lot of potential in it. And we supported 2 business ideas with seed funding for them to kind of go out and start their own business. So one of them, started a coffee tourism business, and another one with a little mill in her backyard to able to have a final, the coffee drip package to be retailable, to be on retail sale in Costa Rica. So that really inspired us to work with youth more and engage them more in the process. And last year, as we were expanding our program a little bit more, we were like, why not, work with youth again and, train them to be able to become facilitators and actually provide them with a stable source of income as part of our organization, but also actually learn from their experience being a coffee farmer themselves and being part of this family. And let's inform our training module to be a little bit more than just, I think, from a certain generation, right? Like a lot of producers in the certain age group, and why can't we actually like expand that? So that was kind of like the invitation that we sent, and then we got a lot of applications. Like we were really floored by, I think we got over like 170 applications within like few weeks time, and we selected the top 10 of this youth to be hired for a time being while we were executing our training, and provided them with the tools to not only kind of lead and facilitate this workshop, but also apply it into their like own visioning and own dreaming and business development process. So although the training only lasted with us for over a year's period, they we are going to also rehire half of them this year. Yeah, well, 5 of them actually are going to go out and do their own projects, and they're kind of like out there implementing their own dreams beyond what Bean Voyage is able to do. So I think a lot of the times, like, our work might be like in multiple fields, and I think that's why it's sometimes really hard to like also summarize them into just like, you know, one sentence or one paragraph. But I think our hope is to be able to kind of focus on like equipping and providing what we can, so that they can actually just take it forward from where we kind of leave, right? And I think we want to be like, we want to be leaving this process as, you know, as early as possible and be irrelevant as fast as possible, so that it no longer is an organization's job, but, you know, all the farmers are actually able to just chart their own path forward.
Yep, let them take the lead. You pass the baton, and ultimately, they're the ones that can be, you know, driving the ship towards their own development. So that's excellent. I want to switch gears just a little bit, but can you tell us about maybe a person or a group that has touched you personally in your work?
I can start, and Abhi, if you want to share yours. I think reflecting on this question, there are so many faces and I think so many stories that kind of like came into my mind. And I think it's also because every one of the groups is really special to us, right? So we do training in groups of 20 to 50, you know, some big groups are 50, but on average, it's about 20 women in one WhatsApp group. And we, on a weekly basis, you know, during the training session, we are constantly communicating with them, and, you know, they will just like also just like check in with us. And I think it's like all the time, all of these interactions have been really, really inspiring for me personally. You know, seeing, you know, from seeing producers coming into the weekly meeting, you know, not only with the mindset to like learn and absorb all the learning materials, but actually making sure that they're checking in on one another. If someone says like they're not doing well, you know, they will be sure to ask like, is everything okay? Like, how's it going? Like, is there anything I can help you with? Or like, you know, propose certain solutions, also suggesting, you know, some of the recommendation and all that. And just seeing that, I think on a weekly basis, it's just really, really inspiring. And I think also maybe if I were to like look at like one person and think of like one person, it's really hard to think of anyone else other than Erika and her family, because it's also, I think, because they are the first group of people, first family to believe in the work that we do. So there was a first family that we met when we were starting Bean Voyage. We didn't even have Bean Voyage back then. We just kind of went, and, you know, we were doing the field search, field interview, and kind of visits, as Abhi was earlier mentioning. And they invited us for lunch, and we were sharing meals, and they opened up and were sharing their challenges and hardship and how they were on the blink of selling their farm because it was just like not profitable. And they somewhat saw something in us, and we saw something in them, to say that should we, you know, start something very small to test the idea of, you know, selling her coffee directly to some of our friends in the US and elsewhere. And from then on, now Erika and her family not only, you know, went beyond just producing coffee to, you know, processing their own coffee, but now they have their own brand called Cafe E&F, that stands for Cafe Erika y Familia. And they have gone on to kind of roast their own coffee for local sales, and also developed and innovated and made new products such as coffee liquor to be able to sold. And it was like a really big hit during Valentine's this year. There was like a huge bulk order apparently from universities and all that. And I think just like seeing that, you know, evolution, right? Like of like how one business can go from like doing one thing to now offering much more, you know, over the period of like 4-5 years. And oftentimes she actually refers to us for having believed in us. But then I think that's actually the emotion that we feel, that, you know, sometimes like when you're starting something, you just need that one person to believe in your idea, right? And I think Erika was that person for us. When everybody was saying like, oh, you guys shouldn't, you're too young to start your own business, or you're too young to dream this big of working with farmers across different sectors and closing gender gap. Like, you guys are just too young and you're naive. And then there was this one person that said like, I see something in you and I want you to do this. And she really informed our business model today. Like, she is the one that, you know, really like almost like not forcing is not the right word, but pushed us in the right direction so that we are including the training element. She pushed us into the right direction so that our modules are not only focusing on the quality, but actually like the comprehensive approach that we are having right now. I think we oftentimes like look back and accredit her for all these inspirations that she's given. So yeah, I'll stop here because I know I went on for a while. Yeah, if Abhi, if you want to.
Really phenomenal story though, and it's true. You need it's a collaboration both ways. You need to believe in each other. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Abhi, how about for you?
For sure. Also, something just very interesting. That story also is something that resonates very much with me. We had gone to that farm, I think around 2016 was when we had this big meeting. It had been after a year of us doing research. And so we'd sat down, and SungHee and I were together back then. And we had a couple other friends, so we were all together. Till 2021, January, we hadn't actually gone back to that farm together. And so it had been almost 4 or 5 years where we both travel quite a bit and are not always actually in the same place. And so we got to go back this year. And this year, when we got to actually go back and talk to them and look at the progress of the farm and the business, it was so inspiring because, you go from being strangers, especially as foreigners and people that don't actually come from the community, to becoming almost like, not almost, you become friends. And then you become kind of comrades in this one vision. And so you have the same aligned vision, and you see that happening over the years. And that's quite touching. And I think for us, that's a very big inspiration for sure. So yeah, I just piggyback on that. I think we have so many stories of producers that I think the best part of the job for both of us is that, especially at this point, we spend most of our time either writing grants or managing sales. Like that's kind of the big part of the work that we have to do as founders. But the best part of the work, which we get to do the least, is when we get to visit farms and we get to spend a day with the producers and be able to actually just, not really focus too much on the business element of things, but more on the human elements of things, which I think gives us energy to kind of keep doing the work that we do. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And where do you see Bean Voyage in the next 5 to 10 years? What is your vision for the future?
For sure. So our big vision, and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, but our big vision for 2030 is to serve 10 million smallholder farmers around the world. As we work towards that big vision, we're looking at a couple of things to help us get there. I think there are two main things, maybe one more third. The first one is introduction of youth as the facilitators. I think the word passing the baton was a really good word you used earlier, Sasha. I think a big part of our vision for this organization is that there are a lot more coffee producers and young coffee producers that are leading the organization towards its kind of next future. So for us to get there, we want to be able to work with more youth as facilitators in the short term, eventually have them be involved in programming and the overall leadership of the organization. The second thing is the introduction of technology. And when we talk about technology at Bean Voyage, we're talking about accessible tools, right? So we're not necessarily talking about the Zooms and the things that producers don't really get to access as easily. So we've been using WhatsApp for the last couple of years as a tool of being able to not only do trainings, but actually create market linkages, things like that. We want to take that to the next level. Right now, our team's working on developing an entire training curriculum that can be delivered using WhatsApp. We've already delivered it last year, but we're growing that. So as we grow that, we'll make our training more accessible, but at the same time scalable across the board. And then the final thing, which is what we're really excited to grow more of, is our presence in the market as well. So this year, with the introduction of the South Korean market as well, and the consistent kind of growth in the European market and in Canada and the US, we're seeing more consumers that want to be part of this movement. And I think the entire model kind of hinges on the fact that we have this balance between the market being engaged and producers being engaged, right? That's when that care element of care trade would work. And so we've I think done an excellent job of engaging with producers, and now we're starting to see the results of all of these years work from the market side, where more and more people are starting to believe in our work and actually invest and put their money where the right investment is, which is in the producer's hands. So that's, I think, the vision that we have. And obviously, as SungHee said, the two of our personal vision for the organization is that at some point we become irrelevant individuals and start looking for other jobs, but maybe that'll take us a decade or so.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, just one more time for anyone who's listening, who's excited about the work that you're doing, who wants to either participate or support your work in some way, what would be the best way for them to do that?
they can get in touch with us at hello@beanvoyage.org. There are various ways that they can be helping, whether it's an individual donation that they make, or purchase that they make directly from our producers, or just overall becoming an advocate and ambassador for the work that we do. So you can learn more about our work at beanvoyage.org and directly get in touch with us also.
All right, perfect. And once again, we'll make sure that's all in the description below, so you are very easily accessible for anyone who wants to learn more or be a part of your work. So thank you both for joining today and for sharing your story. I think it's incredibly inspiring. And, I was personally moved by Erica's story too, and that you believed in each other. And I think that's in and of itself just incredibly beautiful, and to think about how it's grown in a relatively short amount of time and the progress that you've made. So, I just got to say, keep up the good work. I think you're really on the right track, and I look forward to future updates and hearing how your progress is coming along. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having us, Sasha.
Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Here at Emanate International, it is our mission to promote nonprofits and social enterprises that equip the recipients to become independent, autonomous, thriving members of society. Indeed, Bean Voyage is certainly doing great work to support smallholder women to utilize their agency in agricultural communities and eradicate the gender gap that is limiting their agency. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be in the know for future inspirational conversations with other leaders who are making great gains in improving our world. Thank you.